Few days in my life have been as transformative as the one when my father, Robert, unexpectedly passed away at the age of 50. My father was a man of few words and even fewer displays of wealth. So when the lawyer read his will, the shock was absolute. He had left behind a $50 million estate, an unimaginable sum for us. As his eldest son, I had always expected to take over his modest business and carry on his legacy. But this will, not only revealing his hidden fortune, but also its unequal distribution, rocked us all. Sandra and I were to inherit far more than our mother, Susan, and that revelation set off a chain of emotions and disputes that would unravel our family. My mother, 45, was devastated. She could not fathom how the man she had spent 20 years with had secretly accumulated such wealth, or why he would leave it in such an odd, uneven way. Her grief quickly morphed into suspicion, then resentment. How could he do this without her knowledge? Why would he bypass her in this manner? Her sense of betrayal ran deep, shaking the trust she had in their life together. Sandra, 25, however, was unnervingly calm, suggesting she might have known more about our father's intentions than she let on. Her composure only intensified the tension between us, and I found myself torn between my mother's emotional storm and the overwhelming weight of this newfound wealth. I wondered why my father had kept such secrets, why he had lived so modestly, and why he would choose to divide his fortune in this enigmatic way. The inheritance, which seemed like a blessing at first, quickly became a curse. It was a force that threatened to unravel everything I had thought I knew about my family. The days following the revelation were filled with chaos as my mother decided to contest the will. She was driven by grief and disbelief, unwilling to accept that my father had amassed such a fortune without her knowledge or consent. She also questioned the legitimacy of the will itself. Was it forged? Was he coerced into making such decisions? She had enlisted Mr. Jack, our family lawyer, and a legal battle soon consumed us. The court became a stage where our family's dirty laundry was aired, with each session revealing more about our financial and personal lives than we could have ever imagined. My mother argued that my father was not in his right mind when he made the will and suggested undue influence from unknown parties. She fought not just for money, but for clarity, for an understanding of what had truly happened. Sandra, on the other hand, was firm in her stance that my father had every right to distribute his estate as he saw fit. She dismissed our mother's suspicions as disrespectful and futile, which only deepened the divide between them. As the case dragged on, the strain on our family grew unbearable. The media caught wind of our situation, turning it into a public spectacle. Reporters unearthed details of my father's secret investments and silent partnerships, exposing a side of him none of us had known. Our personal grief became entertainment, and it was something none of us were prepared for. Through it all, Mr. Jack remained a steady presence. His expertise in family law and his calm demeanor provided a semblance of stability in the chaos. But even he couldn't prevent the raw emotions that flared with each revelation. The more I sat through those court sessions, the more I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my father. Each new disclosure painted a picture of a man I barely recognized, one whose secrets, once buried, now threatened to change the course of our lives forever. I thought I knew my father, but perhaps I never did. This inheritance, wrapped in mystery and legal red tape, became a symbol of everything lost within our family, connections severed, truths hidden. Throughout it all, my mother's resolve remained unshaken. She pursued the case not just to secure a fair share, but as a quest for answers about the man she had loved and a life they had built together. At its core, this battle was not only about money, but about identity and acknowledgement, standing in the shadow of a legacy that had suddenly become as enigmatic as it was monumental. The legal dispute over my father's will exposed more than just the hidden aspects of his financial life. It began to reshape the very fabric of our family's relationships. As the proceedings dragged on, my sister Sandra's perspective shifted, creating an even greater divide between us. Initially as shocked as anyone by the will's revelations, Sandra slowly started to align herself with its stipulations, embracing the belief that our father had his reasons for the choices he made regarding his estate. She suggested that his decisions were deliberate, perhaps even meant to teach us lessons we hadn't yet understood. This view, however, placed her in direct conflict with our mother, whose challenge to the will's authenticity was rooted in a profound sense of betrayal. She could not accept her exclusion from the inheritance, especially when it favored us, her children, over her. The tension between Sandra and her mother escalated quickly, with family gatherings devolving into battlegrounds of heated debates about loyalty, intention, and grief. Sandra accused our mother of failing to respect our father's autonomy, while Susan, in turn, was hurt by Sandra's apparent lack of empathy for the emotional turmoil the will had unleashed. As Sandra distanced herself from our mother, our once close-knit family began to fracture. The relationship, once warm and intimate, turned cold and formal, a painful transformation that I watched helplessly. I found myself caught in the middle, torn between my loyalty to both women, struggling to maintain peace while grappling with my own conflicting emotions about the inheritance and its consequences. Sandra's evolving stance also affected her relationship with me. We had always been united, allies against whatever challenges life threw at us. But now, the inheritance dispute revealed stark differences between us in terms of wealth, responsibility, and family loyalty. Sandra's newfound assertiveness in claiming what she believed was her rightful share created an unexpected rift between us. Her arguments also prompted me to question my own stance. Could our father have intended this inheritance as a catalyst for change, a lesson in growth? This introspection was difficult and often lonely, as I found myself at odds with both my mother's grief-driven pursuit of justice and Sandra's pragmatic acceptance of the will's terms. As the months passed, the inheritance issue dominated every aspect of our family's existence. The legal battle fueled by these internal conflicts drew attention from not just family and friends, but from the broader community and media. This public scrutiny added a layer of stress and complexity, turning our personal tragedy into a spectacle we were all ill-prepared for. Amidst this turmoil, I found myself reflecting on the deeper meanings of inheritance and legacy. The dispute forced each of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our family, our values, and who we were as individuals. As Sandra drifted further from our mother's emotional orbit, it became clear that whatever the resolution, the outcome of this battle would permanently redefine our family dynamics. The scars from this conflict seemed destined to linger, shaping our relationships and paths for years to come. In the midst of it all, Mr. Jack, our family lawyer, emerged as a pivotal figure. His role went beyond that of legal representation. He became a stabilizing force in both the emotional and legal complexities of our crisis. With his experience and calm demeanor, he navigated the tumultuous waters of our family's drama, trying to find a resolution that could salvage both our familial bonds and our financial interests. From the start, Mr. Jack understood the sensitive nature of the dispute. Beyond the $50 million at stake, he recognized that we were a grieving family struggling to cope with the loss of a patriarch and the shock of his final decisions. His approach was methodical, empathetic, aiming to mediate between conflicting interests within the family, while ensuring that the legal proceedings were handled with fairness and diligence. One of his key strategies was to establish clear communication among all family members, encouraging transparency and open dialogue. He arranged mediation sessions not only with the immediate family but also with extended relatives affected by the fallout. These sessions allowed us to air our grievances in a controlled environment, giving each person the chance to express their feelings without the formality and tension of court. During these mediations, Mr. Jack carefully listened to each family member's concerns. He paid particular attention to my mother, who felt marginalized by the will's provisions, and also engaged with Sandra and me, seeking to understand our positions and the motivations behind our father's decisions. His ability to navigate these conversations with tact and insight helped prevent further escalation of the conflict. Mr. Jack also used his legal expertise to explore all possible outcomes of the will contestation. He outlined the potential scenarios from completely overturning the will to executing it as written, discussing the legal ramifications and likely timelines for each. This clarity helped us set realistic expectations about the long-term financial and emotional costs involved. Additionally, Mr. Jack brought in independent experts, including forensic accountants and estate planning specialists, to provide a clearer picture of my father's financial activities and the possible motivations behind his will's structure. This holistic approach not only deepened our understanding of the legal landscape but also provided essential context for our father's decisions, softening some of the more accusatory tones within the family. Throughout it all, Mr. Jack remained a figure of stability and reason. His presence was a reassuring constant in a time of overwhelming uncertainty, offering a buffer against the emotional chaos that threatened to tear us apart. The new revelations with our sense of identity and family history deepened the fracture between us. It became clear that my father's legacy was far more complex than any of us had imagined. The hidden assets, cleverly concealed through offshore accounts and intricate investments, painted a picture of a man who, on one hand, had provided for us in ways that seemed thoughtful and far-reaching, yet, on the other, had chosen to keep significant aspects of his life in shadow. The more we uncovered, the more elusive his true intentions became. For my mother, Susan, this new discovery felt like another layer of betrayal. The secrecy surrounding these assets only fueled her belief that my father had deliberately excluded her from his financial plans. She grew more adamant in her quest for justice, her heart hardened by what she perceived as yet another wound in a long line of disappointments. Her grief over the will's original provisions was compounded by this revelation, making any potential compromise seem increasingly distant. Sandra, meanwhile, shifted further into her position of firm acceptance of our father's decisions. To her, these hidden assets confirmed what she had believed all along, that my father was a man of vision and financial acumen whose choices, no matter how unconventional, were ultimately intended to secure our futures. This only further entrenched her in opposition to our mother's emotional appeals, reinforcing the growing ideological divide between them. Sandra's perspective felt increasingly like an intellectualization of the situation, while Susan's was rooted in raw emotion and a sense of personal betrayal. As the eldest son, I found myself at the center of this storm, trying to balance the deep emotional rifts with the legal realities. My attempts to mediate, to find common ground between my mother's grief and Sandra's more pragmatic approach, seemed futile as the family became more entrenched in its positions. Each new revelation, each twist in the legal battle, seemed to pull us further apart. Mr. Jack, ever the calm and professional figure, continued to guide us through the process, though even his expertise could not smooth over the emotional tumult that followed each discovery. His role evolved from lawyer to counselor, from legal strategist to a steady hand amidst the chaos. But even he, with all his experience, found it difficult to predict where this dispute would lead. Each new asset uncovered shifted the dynamics, creating opportunities for reconciliation, but also igniting new conflicts. The legal negotiations over the additional assets became a marathon of discussions, each more exhausting than the last. Mr. Jack, with his sharp legal mind, worked tirelessly to craft a settlement that could satisfy everyone, but the task seemed Sisyphean. At times, it felt like we were not negotiating over assets, but over the very fabric of our family's identity and what it meant to be part of a legacy that was now so fraught with complexity and uncertainty. As we moved forward, the idea of legacy itself evolved for me. It was no longer just about the wealth my father had left behind. It was about the values he had imparted, the memories of him that we each carried, and the fragmented ways in which we now tried to understand him. The financial assets, once a symbol of stability and security, had become a source of division, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we may never fully understand the man who had left us so much, and so little, at the same time. The strain of trying to reconcile these differences, of reconciling my own fractured relationship with my family, became the defining challenge of my life. I had always believed that family could overcome anything, that love and loyalty were unbreakable. But the inheritance, the legal disputes, and the revelations about my father's hidden life had shattered that belief. I wasn't sure if we could ever find a way back to each other, or if the scars left by this battle would be permanent. The more I struggled to hold my family together, the more I began to understand that the true legacy of our father might not lie in the wealth he left us, but in how we chose to carry on in his absence, how we chose to define ourselves in the wake of his secrets, his decisions, and the painful truths that had been unearthed. Whether we could heal and rebuild our connections, or whether we would remain forever fractured, was a question that lingered unanswered as the legal proceedings continued to unfold. And the secretive nature of my father's financial dealings. To her, this wasn't just about money, it was about a lifetime of partnership and sacrifice that she now felt had been undermined by Robert's choices. Her pain, compounded by the sense of betrayal, had hardened her resolve. She refused to accept a resolution that didn't acknowledge the depth of her emotional and financial contribution to the family's success. She wanted her share, not just to fulfill her material needs, but as a statement of justice for what she felt had been stolen from her, both in the will and in their shared life. Sandra, on the other hand, took a more pragmatic view. She argued that our father had made his decisions with a long-term perspective, intending to create a legacy of financial stability that would allow us to thrive, without the burden of constant dependency on his wealth. She saw the hidden assets as further proof of his foresight and strategic thinking, and she believed that our father's intentions were clear. He wanted us to rise above our emotions and work together as a family to manage his wealth wisely, not squander it in pursuit of personal grievances. Her stance was firm, but it increasingly alienated her from our mother, who interpreted Sandra's support of the will as a disregard for her pain. The tension between their opposing views created an impasse in our discussions. Every attempt at negotiation seemed to deepen the divide rather than heal it. I tried to stay in the middle, to mediate between them, but I felt increasingly like a rope being pulled in two directions. My mother's demand for respect and acknowledgement clashed with Sandra's belief in the necessity of financial prudence and a detached view of our father's motives. As the days wore on, the mediation sessions orchestrated by Mr. Jack became more strained. While he remained a calm and professional presence, his guidance alone couldn't bridge the emotional chasm that had opened between us. Each session felt like we were walking through a minefield where even the smallest misstep could lead to a new explosion of anger or hurt. The conversations grew more defensive, more entrenched, and the possibility of a resolution seemed to slip further away with each passing week. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me more with each failed attempt at reconciliation. I understood my mother's desire for justice, her feeling that she had been left out of a legacy that should have been hers by right. I also understood Sandra's perspective, her belief that we had to focus on the bigger picture and honor our father's long-term intentions. But as the eldest, I was caught between the two, trying to protect both sides while also attempting to maintain some semblance of family unity. It was an exhausting and thankless role, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing everyone. The legal proceedings themselves were not much better. Every court appearance seemed to fuel the conflict further, as each family member dug in their heels. The media coverage only added to the pressure, distorting our private pain into a public spectacle. The courtroom became a stage for our most personal battles, and the reporters outside were all too eager to paint a sensational picture of a wealthy family torn apart by greed. It was a nightmare we couldn't escape, and each day felt like we were losing more of ourselves in the process. Even as the prospect of a settlement seemed more distant, the discovery of hidden assets brought a new layer of complexity to the situation. Suddenly, the $50 million was no longer the full picture. New wealth had been uncovered: real estate holdings, investments in private companies, and a sprawling portfolio of stocks and bonds. This new information only deepened the divide. It offered the potential for a fairer resolution, but it also magnified the stakes, making each side more desperate to claim their share. In the end, the real challenge was not just about dividing wealth. It was about healing the wounds that had been exposed during this process. The inheritance dispute had become a mirror, reflecting back all the unresolved issues, unspoken grievances, and hidden resentments that had been buried for years. And no matter how hard we tried to reach a resolution, it felt as though the emotional cost of this battle might be something we could never truly repair. As Mr. Jack worked tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to craft a settlement that could bring some measure of peace, I found myself wondering if any amount of wealth could ever compensate for the damage done. Could we find a way to move forward? Or were we doomed to be defined by this inheritance, a legacy not of love and togetherness, but of division, secrecy, and regret? The path to resolution remained elusive, and each passing day made it clear that our family would never be the same. The final verdict arrived with a sense of finality, but also a bittersweet recognition that the true work of healing was just beginning. The judge's decision, though structured to appease all parties to some extent, was not a panacea. It did not erase the emotional scars or the years of resentment that had built up over time. The redistribution of the estate, which placed considerable weight on my mother's contributions, was an acknowledgement of the deep betrayal she felt, but it also left Sandra with lingering questions about whether her father's true wishes had been honored. The substantial share she received came with conditions that were meant to safeguard the legacy of my father's business acumen, conditions that, while fair from a legal standpoint, felt like a constant reminder that she was being held to a higher standard than the rest of us. For me, the role I had been entrusted with was both a privilege and a burden. I was to ensure that the balance between honoring my father's business legacy and providing for the fair treatment of my family members was maintained. This responsibility weighed heavily on me. It wasn't just about managing assets, it was about bridging the emotional gap that had been growing wider with every legal maneuver, every negotiation session, and every court appearance. I knew that this role would not just require business savvy, it would demand a level of emotional intelligence and patience that I wasn't sure I possessed. The most surprising aspect of the verdict, however, was the judge's decision to mandate family counseling. It was a recognition that the rift between us wasn't merely about money, but about trust, respect, and the very foundations of our relationships. In the aftermath of such a high-stakes battle, the emotional wounds ran deep, and it would take more than financial settlements to heal them. It was a humbling moment, one that reminded us all that no matter how much wealth was at stake, the intangible aspects of family, love, loyalty, and connection were far more complex and fragile. The days following the verdict were a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The legal fight was over, but the emotional fallout still loomed large. We each retreated into ourselves, processing the outcome in our own ways. The counseling sessions, which we had initially approached with skepticism, began to reveal truths we had long ignored. It wasn't just about my father's estate. It was about understanding why we had each reacted the way we had, why the sense of betrayal felt so profound, and why the wounds of the past had been so difficult to confront. Over time, we began to see that we were not simply adversaries in a battle for financial gain. We were family members who had all been hurt by the same person, the man we had loved, respected, and perhaps misunderstood. Each of us had suffered a loss, not just of money, but of something more intimate, the trust we had placed in our father, the belief that he had always acted in our best interests. The revelations of his hidden wealth, his secretive nature, and his manipulation of the family dynamic had shattered that belief, leaving us to pick up the pieces. The path to healing was slow, and it felt like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. But as the months passed, there were moments of clarity, small glimpses of understanding, of forgiveness. We began to let go of some of our anger, to understand the choices we had made, and to see each other not as enemies, but as people who had been shaped by the same set of circumstances, albeit in different ways. It wasn't easy. The emotional residue of the legal battle lingered for a long time, and trust would take years to rebuild. But in the end, I came to realize that the true legacy my father had left us was not just the wealth he had accumulated, but the complex and often painful dynamics he had created. It was a legacy of secrets, of love intertwined with control, of ambition shadowed by fear. And as I navigated my new role as the steward of his estate, I understood that my task was not just to preserve his financial legacy, but to help rebuild our family in whatever way we could. The verdict had reshaped our family in ways we couldn't have anticipated. It had imposed a new structure on our interactions, on our financial dealings, and most importantly, on the way we saw one another. It was a hard-fought resolution, one that offered no easy answers, but perhaps it was the first step toward understanding and ultimately toward healing. The final chapter of our inheritance battle was not just a legal resolution. It marked the beginning of something more profound, an opportunity to rebuild, heal, and redefine what family meant to us. The lessons we gleaned from this painful process became the cornerstones of our future, offering us a framework for navigating relationships that had been scarred by years of secrecy, betrayal, and unmet expectations. As we embraced transparency, the sense of trust that had been shattered began to slowly rebuild. We learned the hard way that open lines of communication were essential, not only about finances, but about our personal needs, fears, and desires. The assumption that silence could protect us from conflict had been a misguided belief, one that we could never afford to repeat. Financial planning, too, was no longer a distant, impersonal matter. My father's secretive approach had left us unprepared for the emotional turmoil his estate's division caused. Moving forward, we committed to creating a more inclusive approach to estate planning, ensuring that future generations would be equipped with clarity, understanding, and a sense of fairness. The mandated counseling sessions, though initially met with resistance, ultimately became a transformative tool. They gave us a space to unpack years of buried emotions and unspoken grievances, allowing us to finally hear one another in ways we hadn't before. Through this process, I began to see my mother, sister, and myself not as adversaries or competitors, but as individuals with deep-seated pain that had been festering for far too long. Listening, to really listen, became our most powerful tool in bridging the divides. We also learned, sometimes painfully, that wealth is not merely an asset. It can be both a blessing and a curse. It has the potential to open doors, create opportunities, and even promote social good. Yet, it can also be the wedge that drives people apart. The inheritance battle served as a stark reminder of how financial gain can distort the very relationships it is meant to support. This realization led us to place less emphasis on material wealth and more on the intangible things that truly bind us: love, trust, shared memories, and mutual respect. Slowly but surely, the three of us, Susan, Sandra, and I, began to forge a new type of relationship. It was more guarded, more cautious perhaps, but also grounded in an understanding of the fragility of what we had once taken for granted. We found new ways to spend time together, to enjoy each other's company without constantly revisiting the ghosts of the past. Our shared philanthropic efforts, funded by a portion of the inheritance, became a beacon for healing. These projects, rooted in our father's legacy, gave us something constructive to focus on, something bigger than the sum of his wealth and the legacy of pain it had caused. As we invested in these efforts, the focus of our family's story shifted. Instead of being defined by a bitter inheritance dispute, we began to define ourselves by the positive impact we could make together. The experience was transformative, not because we were able to resolve every issue, but because we learned to confront them head-on. We faced our demons, our anger, our regrets, and our doubts, and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more united. Looking back, the inheritance dispute felt like a crucible, one that had tested the very foundations of our family. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined us. What had once seemed like an insurmountable divide now felt like an opportunity to rebuild with a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Our family was forever changed, but in a way that left room for hope. A hope that we could not only repair the damage done but use the lessons learned to create a future based on mutual respect, unity, and love.